Warm greetings from the High 10. It's Everyday Shenanigans, Sunday, January 26, 2020. I wanted to start off with saying that, it's been a crazy, crazy afternoon already with the videos I've uploaded. But I want to discuss, a documentary that's airing on Netflix because I wanted to start something new with discussing at least a movie or documentary or any type of TV program once a week with you guys. And my pick this week is Killer Inside the Mind of Aaron Hernandez. It is a three-part episode. It was very interesting, intriguing, mind-blowing. A lot came out about this guy. And those of you who follow him knew that he, was drafted to the New England Patriots during the draft of 2010. He was a fourth round pick. He obviously had a lot of secrets and disturbing behavior that he exhibited. Some knew it, maybe some didn't. And he ended up going on trial for murder of Mr. Odin Lloyd. And he was convicted and found guilty. He was also mentioned in another crime of two gentlemen, a Daniel DeAbreu and Safiro Furtado in 2012. And he went to trial for those two murders and was found not guilty. And I just went online and found more information that was not in the documentary that I recollect. And this states that he's also was linked to two other murders of two unnamed persons in 2007. So you see, Mr. Hernandez had a troubled life. What I gathered from this documentary is that the precursor for violence was already there. And this happens with a lot of people who come from violent backgrounds, violent homes. They tend to exhibit the same behavior that was exacted in their home or their upbringing or neighborhoods. And his father would beat his mother. Now, I believe that he possibly liked his father, but who can say? Because we don't have him here to give an in-depth interview or commentary about his relationship with his father and mother. But during this documentary, it was played out as if, he liked his father, he cared for his father, he felt like his father kept him in line, or that's how it was relayed to me, is that the father kept him in line. But we realize that with the things that Mr. Hernandez got himself into with being violent toward others, is that he learned that behavior from his father. We also learned in this documentary that he was a bisexual male. He had a relationship with a classmate that was also a football player with him in high school by the name of Dennis Sansucci. He was a quarterback in high school. And during this documentary, Dennis lets everyone know that he and Aaron participated in a relationship with one another. And you also will hear audio from taped conversations with Aaron in the jail with his mother, Shayana, the fiance, and another friend that he talked to. And what I gathered was that, and Miss Tanya, a cousin, who was a cousin who was sickly and dying of cancer at the time. What I learned listening to everything that went on in this documentary is that he was troubled from the jump. He was a chameleon. He hid his feelings. He did not let the public know how he actually felt, but he exhibited violent behavior when he was at the University of Florida by busting a guy's eardrum because he asked for him to pay his tab and wouldn't. So Florida, that university, knew he had issues. They knew that he smoked marijuana, but they still kept him on the team, still let him ride the ride. Although they had information from other teammates that when he went home to Connecticut, that he was participating in using drugs. But they didn't do anything. So they passed the buck on. He ended up, as I stated, being drafted the fourth round. And I think maybe New England was leery, and they should have been, because look at the fallout. He still was using marijuana heavily, And they knew that and took him anyway beforehand. They knew he had an issue in college. And yet they signed him anyway. And he was using very heavily, I think, up until the point when he committed the murder of Mr. Lloyd. Now, Mr. Lloyd was the boyfriend of Aaron's. Mr. Lloyd dated Aaron's sister. Aaron's girlfriend's sister. Excuse me. I'll get that correctly. So they were connected. They all met. They shared sisters. Each were dating a sister. Excuse me. Now, why he murdered Mr. Odin is a mystery, and that was never revealed in the documentary, which I found baffling. That to this date, there is no said reason for why he murdered that guy. The reason he murdered those two, allegedly, the Daniel DeArbreu and Safira Furtado in Boston after a nightclub incident of them accidentally splashing a drink on him on a dance floor. He saw them afterwards, followed them, and shot at them. But of course he went to trial, was found not guilty. But a friend who was with him that night alleges that he did that. Now why would a stranger or anyone implicate you in that? Because that means they're telling on themselves. Excuse me. And only a fool would do that. And then that same guy ends up being shot down in Florida on a trip with Aaron. But yet he does not say that Aaron is the one who shot him. Police question why. But naturally he let it be known. In trial, he wanted revenge. He wasn't going to let the police handle that situation. So you see, Aaron had a lot going on. The father was abusive towards his mother. He did not obviously have a good relationship with his mother. You hear that in a jail audio of him telling his mother he felt like he could not confide in her. He could not talk to her about various things. That he was closer to Tanya. She was more of a mother to him. The mother also, after his father passed away, the mother had took up with this Tanya lady, who is her cousin. She took up with her husband. And imagine, that is terrible. Imagine, your daddy dies, a month later, your mother is now sleeping with the cousin's husband. All that was revealed in this documentary. The homosexuality factor. The fact that he would mention it in conversations with his mother while he was in jail, and Shayana. And my take on the mother was more of a, maybe not too much of a doting parent. The girlfriend, Shayana, fiance, I didn't get a good vibe about her. That's just my perception. A lot of the conversation was jokey, and I didn't think that no one was serious. And I understand, even when a person is incarcerated, you have to share a laugh or two, but he was in there on trial for murdering your sister's boyfriend. And naturally, they didn't air every conversation in this documentary, but I just found their conversation odd to me. And the fact that he was talking about homosexuals in the jail, walking around with breasts and things, and she was scolding him, telling him, don't talk like that, don't call them things. That was interesting. Why are you talking about that with your fiance? He also talked about the homosexuals in jail with his mother in a jailed conversation. I thought that was odd. And she was just basically saying, well, let them be, let them do what they want to do. It's life, there's nothing you can do about it. I think somehow he was reaching out, but he didn't really want to say that I'm really one of these people. One of these things. But he couldn't tell his mother that now, could he? He definitely couldn't tell the fiance that he was one of those things. Very interesting, the things that came out in this documentary. But as I state, the precursor for violence was always there, with the father beating the mother. He didn't have a good relationship with his mother. He was the type that was, if you slighted him in any way, he would act out violently, put his hands on you. And as I state, the University of Florida gave him a pass, you see, because at some point you had to have seen the signs. The coach had to have seen the signs that Aaron was not functioning properly. And even on his scores, where I guess the NFL did a test on him, in the maturity part of the test, he scored very low. And I think that was obvious. A grown man wanting Harry Potter books in jail tells you a lot. No pun intended for those who like Harry Potter, but you get where I'm going. A man almost 30 years old, of all the books that he would prefer to have someone bring him to jail would be Harry Potter books, tells you a lot about his demeanor. The fact that he took up with people from his town once he was pro show his mindset. That instead of him trying to better himself and be a better human, he was trying to hang with street people. Why? Maybe that's just who he was. And I think that's where a lot of people were conflicted. Fans, teammates, the coach, the owner of the team. You thought you knew this man, but he was a chameleon. He gave a show in the locker room, the field, but behind closed doors, he was an angry person that if he felt slighted in any way, he didn't have any problem with beating you up or shooting you. And the fact that now they're saying he's been linked to 4 dead people says a lot about who Aaron Hernandez was. He was tainted. His soul was tainted. And you can see that in this documentary, that he was a lost cause, that perhaps growing up he was hiding who he actually was. His brother alludes to the fact that he believed that he was molested by another older child in an event. And possibly that's what changed who he was. And we know this happens to many people once they have been molested or sexually assaulted by someone, child or adult, that they change. The mindset changes. But it's an interesting documentary. But one thing I will say, just from seeing things play out in the media, TV, whatever, that a lot of people uphold athletes in their wrongdoing, their misgivings, their nasty behavior, their foul mouth, and they just pass them on and don't say anything, and they end up becoming vile monsters because nobody wants to go to that person and say, hey, you've got a problem, you have an attitude problem, you have a drug problem, an alcohol problem, you need help. Because eventually you're going to lay by the wayside if you don't straighten your act. And I think that's what happened with this guy. That people saw signs, but they pushed it under the rug. Him beating up that guy at that bar in Florida as a young man was the start of it all. You go in a club and get drunk, and then when the tab comes, you don't want to pay it, so you beat the guy up and beat him up, hit him in the ear, bust his eardrum. He didn't file charges once he realized who he was. But you see, that was the start of the problem. He had a very close relationship with the cousin, Tanya, a lady who was dying of cancer, a relative. And he looked to her. But she also aided him as well in his wrongdoing, because they ended up finding a car parked in her garage that was linked to the 2 murders that happened in 2012. So you see, she was complicit as well in knowing he's done something wrong. Why hide the car there? And she aided him, was even found in contempt in court because she didn't want to tell on him. So you see, even from a young man, college, adulthood, people aided him. The fiance aided him. They have her on camera taking a bag out of a glass door. And in that bag, they believe it was a gun safe. So she knew he was guilty of killing her sister's boyfriend. But yet she stood by him anyway. And I don't have empathy for that. Because Odin Lloyd belonged to somebody. He was somebody's child. And his life was valuable as well. And this is what happens when people aid other people in their wrongdoing and they give them a pass. And you see this a lot in the sports industry of people witnessing bad behavior and they turn a blind eye and laugh it off until the worst happens, such in this case, murder. And then people are conflicted because they don't know what to believe, if it's a rumor or they got the wrong guy. But everything led to Aaron in this case. Now, as I stated, he was found not guilty for the other two murders that happened in 2012. But his friend attests he did that because he was with him that night. Please watch the documentary. It is very riveting, it's thought-provoking, it's baffling, it's shocking, because it spins the tale of a young man who was tainted, who was a chameleon. He pretended to be somebody that he was not. And 2 years after being found guilty of murder, he killed himself inside a prison. And I think he killed himself because he was outed by a pen pal lover that was speculated. And I don't think he could live with the fact of people knowing that he was a homosexual, bisexual. Now, of course, the fiance, I saw in an interview today, didn't believe that he was that way. But in my mind, I tell myself, why wouldn't you believe that? Because you see, you don't fully know people. Now, in this documentary, they didn't interview this young man who was a pen pal, the alleged lover. But it was speculated that this gentleman wrote him and they had a thing or whatever. It's up to interpretation. But I think there's probably some truth to it. And I think that's why he mentioned it in his jailhouse conversations to his mother and her. Because you have to ask yourself, why would a man want to talk about that to women or men on the phone? And I also realized he didn't have any empathy. That in those conversations that they revealed, he had no remorse for killing Mr. Odin, because naturally he said he didn't. He never discussed it in the conversations that they showed. He didn't seem sorry. It was as if he was content with being in that small cell. And at one point he did mention that he wanted to be free. But I think it was long into his stay in jail that he even admitted that. I think he liked being there. And the fact that he said, I looked back at my room before walking out and realized I've got a neat cell. Now, what type of person would say that? Incarcerated and facing life in prison for murder. Aaron Hernandez was an empty vessel. And sadly enough, but truthful, he belonged in that cell because he killed a man probably for no apparent reason, such as the other two men that I do believe that he murdered. Shooting his friend in Florida, he didn't care because he was empty inside. His brain was studied, and it was found that he did have the CTE disorder. But I still think, as some will say, he knew better. And you can't blame all of it on head concussions and injuries. That he already had the precursor for violence from watching his father violate his mother. And that will be up to interpretation as well, the brain disorder that they discovered after death, of course. But it is an interesting tale, and I recommend you watch it. And you drop your comments below and you tell me what you think of this Killer Inside the Mind of Aaron Hernandez 3-part series running on Netflix. It is a baffling tale, a very baffling tale. And I'm sure that more will come out because, you know, when things are released in documentaries, more people start talking and giving their versions of things. But there's also an interview with the girlfriend that Dr. Phil did on NBC. Then A&E has a version of this storyline with Marsha Clark, and Oxygen also has a version of this Aaron Hernandez storyline. So log on to those said information if you want to get more information. But please tune into Netflix for Killer Inside the Mind of Aaron Hernandez, airing now on Netflix. It's a riveting tale of his life, and I recommend it. I highly recommend it. And I highly recommend any young men out here who feel they have anger issues, seek help. Because you don't want to end up like he did. Because it was a talent wasted. It was a talent wasted. Like and share. This is Everyday Shenanigans, and thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.